Hello, my friends. Hello, and welcome once again to stately Vaughan Manor, where it's time for my weekend reading report. My weekend reading report, where Roger and I talk about all the exciting stuff I read last week. And I'll talk about anything that just kind of showed up magically at the manor. I don't know how stuff shows up here, but it does. I have nothing to do with it. Anyway, what did I read last week? So, I finished one book. I'm in the middle of another one. The book I finished is this one, The Lost Continent by Edgar Rice Burroughs, with this awesome cover by Frank Frazetta. Now, this was written in 1916 during World War I. And in this novel, World War I never ends. It just goes on and on and on. And this takes place 200 years later. So 100 years from now, basically. So in this far future, America and North America, it's all one big nation now, but they've become so isolationist that they will not have any contact with Europe or Africa or Asia or any place other than the Americas, basically. They've completely, stopped contact under law. You're not allowed to contact anybody basically outside the Americas. So they're super isolationist. And they have no idea what's going on in the rest of the world. And our hero of this story, a young Navy officer who's in his hovercraft crashes and he ends up in Europe, exactly where he's not supposed to be. He ends up in England to begin with. And England, Britain at this time, has just become, it's been destroyed basically by never-ending war. All Europe has been just destroyed by never-ending war. And overrun with wild animals. So Britain is overrun with lions and tigers and other creatures. And the few human beings who are left are barbarians now with, very low technology. They run around with spears and stuff. They're barbarians. Just fighting for survival. And so our hero meets a young barbarian princess. Actually, she's a queen. She's the Queen of England, actually. But the really interesting part is when our hero runs into the Africans. So, Edgar Rice Burroughs, it's always hard to pin down his views on race. Always, because it's so different from book to book. And in this novel of the future, Africa has become one nation. It's united and has become one nation, a very powerful nation. And they've really prospered because the Africans have not destroyed themselves with war like Europe has. And so they've actually sent out military expeditions to Europe, and they have plans to colonize Europe because they figure they can conquer it, now that it's been driven into barbarity. And they take slaves. Africa owns slaves, and the slaves are the white people from Europe, who they just naturally assume are inferior, which is an interesting thing about this book. The Africans are not presented as evil or as any kind of stereotypes. They're just people who have a very powerful nation, and they decide to go out and conquer stuff, just like, imperialist Europeans did. And that's an interesting thing, because our hero becomes a slave, but he's favored because the military commander who takes him as a slave sees that he's different than the average run-of-the-mill barbarians that he's used to capturing. He has a hard time believing the things that our hero says, because they've lost contact with America and they have no idea that America has become so technologically powerful. And America's technology is better than the Africans' technology. But it's just interesting that Edgar Rice Burroughs is, you know, putting this kind of thing in his story and presenting the Africans as just, you know, basically they're the new Europeans. And that they just naturally assume that white people are inferior because, you know, they're savages, of course. It's just an interesting thing that Edgar Rice Burroughs is talking about here. And then the Africans, it turns out, are having a war or are fighting the Chinese, because the Chinese have a huge empire as well. And I thought, oh, here comes the racism, you know, when the Chinese show up. Because this is the age when this was written of the yellow peril showing up, you know. And that whole anti-Chinese racism that you'd find in pulp magazines all the time. But actually, no, not at all. China is a very benevolent empire, as it turns out, and they want to help the Europeans because they think, you know, that'll be a good thing for the world if Europe gets back on its feet. And our hero ends up talking to the emperor of China, and it's interesting because nobody in this book is a stereotype. Nobody is presented as inferior or the other. It's just all people who are in the positions they're in because of circumstances. It's an interesting book, and it's fun because it's got all that stuff that you expect from Edgar Rice Burroughs, you know, action and adventure and fighting and, you know, wild animals and all that stuff. It's a good Edgar Rice Burroughs novel full of, just like I said, interesting stuff. It was fun. I'm glad I read that. Then, currently, I'm reading this. This is The Last Man by Mary Shelley, which is the July pick for Roger's Cheap Old Book Club. Why you do this to me, Roger? Why'd you make me read this book? So, The Last Man by Mary Shelley is not a thrill-a-minute, unlike that Edgar Rice Burroughs novel. So, this is a book with a lot of interesting stuff in it. There's a lot of interesting things about this book. Unfortunately, none of those things have anything to do with the story itself. Now, I haven't finished it yet, so we'll see how it all turns out. But so far, it's been rough going because it's tediously dull. This is not an exciting book. So, I mean, it's got a lot of melodrama in it, which is a plus. I mean, it's just so dramatic. The characters in this are just so dramatic. They're so dramatic. So this is about a worldwide pandemic that wipes out everybody on Earth except for the last man. But Mary Shelley spends a lot of time with the characters, all of whom except one are going to die. And she builds up all of these characters. And so we go through, this book is mostly about the process of the pandemic, how it shows up, people slowly dying, nations falling apart. This is another science fiction novel that takes place in the future. There's been no technological advancement at all from Mary Shelley's day, it seems like. She could not imagine at the time that she was writing this any of the technological innovations or inventions or changes that happen in the world. So the most technologically advanced thing that happens is that people use hot air balloons for travel. But otherwise, things seem pretty much the same as in Mary Shelley's day. I'll talk more about this when I finished it. It's not particularly exciting though, or it's slow going. Like I said, it is no Frankenstein. At this point, Mary Shelley was, I think, a much more bitter person. I think she had just suffered so much loss in her life, and she puts all of that in this book, which is one of the interesting things about it. I think she was compelled to write this book for personal reasons. It was not well received when it was first published, and it was pretty much forgotten about until the 1960s. Like I said, because of what this is about, though, you know, there are interesting things about this book. But like I said, I'll get more into this when I've finished it. The only other thing I read other than comics this week are this is Astounding Science Fiction for June 1951. Every month I'm reading an issue of Astounding magazine, science fiction magazine, from 1951, and this is the June issue with this magnificent cover. Look at that. That's awesome. Some of these covers for these old Astounding issues are just fantastic. On the back, it's got some cool little advertising for some collector's miniatures. You know, relax with a hobby. Relax with a hobby. Now, back then, they didn't have booktubes, so for a hobby, you would have miniatures and stuff like that, you know. Stuff like that. But this was another excellent read. This actually had an Isaac Asimov story in it, so that was cool. Let me get to the title page there. So we had, for novelettes, June 1951, we had And Then They Were None by Eric Frank Russell. That was good. Breeds There a Man, ? By Isaac Asimov. And I don't think I had read that story by Isaac Asimov I don't think I had read that story by Isaac Asimov before. Breeds There a Man. It was good. It's not great. It was not my best, it's not my favorite Isaac Asimov story, but it was good. Then we had short stories. We had Bait by Roy L. Clough Jr., Crisis by Edward Grendon, and the Maokai Chant by J.A. Mayer. And so, you know, another fun Astounding Science Fiction magazine with some cool old-timey artwork that probably has not been reprinted ever, and that's always a fun thing. I always love to see the artwork in these old issues, which you probably will not find anywhere else except these old original magazines. Excuse me, I received a telephone call. I don't know why people don't know not to call me. Where's my secretary? I don't know why people call me when I'm in the middle of filming my important videos. Oh well, where was I? Anyway, this was awesome. This was a great time. I'm really enjoying this Astounding Science Fiction project. It's fun to read all of these original science fiction stories in the original magazine format. It's cool. It's like going back in time once a month to read this magazine. So there's that. I also read some comic book stuff for the World's Finest Challenge, where I'm reading Batman and Superman every day. I am on the final volume of John Byrne's revamp of Superman, The Man of Steel, Volume 4. This was from the very cringy part of this book where Wonder Woman and Superman kiss each other. It was very awkward. It's John Byrne, not the finest writer in the world. And yeah, that scene between Superman and Wonder Woman was just kind of cringy. And it's interesting to read these now, so many years after I first read them. I have a couple more stories left in this, and then I'll talk more about it. I did finish this. This is Batman Hush by Jeff Loeb and Jim Lee. This was really entertaining. I like this a lot. I can see why this is a favorite of Batman fans. I like Jim Lee's art a lot. I know he has his limitations. Faces, tend to look alike, particularly on the female characters. I realize that, but still, that's not unique to him among comic book artists. That's for sure. And I really enjoyed this. This has some great moments in it. Let's see if I could find my very favorite moment. I should have. Here it is. When Crypto the Superdog shows up. Any comic book that has Crypto the Superdog, my favorite character after Superman, Crypto. Any comic book that has Crypto is awesome. And so, it was worth it just for that. As for the mystery itself, this is a mystery, that Batman has to solve, and in the process, he runs up against all of his main villains. It was decent. I wouldn't say anything in this is particularly surprising, but it was good. It was good. I enjoyed this quite a bit. I'm not sure it's the best Batman story in the world, but certainly an entertaining Batman story. Superman's in there, Crypto's in there, so what more do you need in life? A few things did show up here at the Manor. The Pulp Western Anthology Volume 1, this was sent me by Douglas, who also sent me another one of these. I guess he sent me more than one. So thank you, Douglas, for this. This is just as awesome as the other one was. It's just what it says, a Pulp Western Anthology with old Western stories from the Pulps. So that's awesome. I look forward to reading these because I love that kind of stuff. Then Gary Lovisi sent me a copy of of the magazine that he publishes, Paperback Parade. This is Paperback Parade number 116. And Gary sent me this because of a couple of articles in it. There's an interview in here which is very timely because it's just in time for Garb August, because we've got the king of movie novelizations. This is an interview with Alan Dean Foster. Now, that's this guy, not this guy. It's this guy. That's Alan Dean Foster. And there's the original printing of Star Wars. That's his novelization. It says George Lucas wrote it, but George Lucas didn't write the novel. Alan Dean Foster did. And so Alan Dean Foster is a science fiction writer and fantasy writer who's very well known for writing great novelizations of films, and as well as a bunch of other books. Like there's Alien, one of his novelizations, as well as a couple of his other books that he wrote. And he's actually a really good writer, Alan Dean Foster. And this magazine also, if I could get to it, has an article on the Star Trek logs, because Alan Dean Foster took the scripts to the Star Trek cartoon and made novelettes or novels in a couple cases off of those scripts, and they were all part of the Star Trek Logs series, which I will be reading this month, actually all summer long. It's Book Trek 2023, which is a reading event devoted to reading Star Trek fiction. And I will be getting to the Star Trek Logs by Alan Dean Foster. These are supposed to be great, and so I'm really looking forward to reading these. So thank you very much, Gary, for sending this. This is a great magazine anyway. Paperback Parade, if you're interested in old paperbacks of any kind. It has all kinds of cool stuff in this magazine. All kinds of cool stuff in Paperback Parade. So thanks, Gary, for sending that to me. That's awesome. I did get some comic books in the mail. Got an Epic collection finally. Finally, Roger, an Epic collection showed up. It's been a couple weeks with no Epics. So here we have Captain America. This is Captain America Volume 5. You know, these Epic collections, they're not printed in chronological order. So Epic Collection Volume 5, this has stories from 1973 to 1974. And this is The Secret Empire, Captain America, The Secret Empire. A great Captain America story. where Captain America becomes disillusioned with the United States government and gives up. By the end of this epic collection, he's decided, spoiler alert, he's going to give up his Captain America identity and become Nomad. He became Nomad for a short period of time. But this chronicles the events leading up to that. Of course, you've got the Black Panther, you've got the Falcon, so, you know, it's going to be great. Yeah, this was a particularly cool time for Captain America. It has a bunch of Sal Buscema artwork, which I actually like. I like Sal Buscema quite a bit. His artwork is simple, but I do appreciate it. I do like his work. So yeah, Captain America, The Secret Empire. That was awesome. Glad that showed up. And then some EC stuff showed up. EC Comics. This is The Haunt of Fear. This is volume 2 of the EC archives for The Haunt of Fear. So there was 3 main horror comics from EC. They had Tales from the Crypt, of course. They had The Vault of Horror and The Haunt of Fear. And at this point, when we get into our second volume, we're getting to the particularly ghastly stuff. This was a cover by Ghastly Graham Ingalls. And so we're getting more zombies and guts and things like that are showing up by the second volumes of these, because they've figured out, okay, we can get away with some stuff now. Let's make this stuff even more horrible. And there's just some magnificent art in these volumes. Just awesome stuff. So yeah, I got The Haunt of Fear, volume 2. Now my favorite EC stuff was the science fiction stuff. We've got Weird Fantasy, volume 1. I love this series. I love all of these old science fiction stories from EC Comics. So there's volume 1 of that. And then we've got Incredible Science Fiction, volume 1, which has... This took place when EC did its New Direction titles. This is after EC Comics got in a bunch of trouble and the Comics Code Authority showed up. But they kept on with science fiction. And so it started off weird science fantasy because they combined weird fantasy and weird science into one comic, and eventually retitled that Weird Science Fantasy. And it's really cool. And then we have this Frank Frazetta cover for Weird Science Fantasy. We've got some great Wally Wood and Al Williamson and some other great stuff in this. It's just awesome. So I was very happy to get that. So that is all the EC stuff I've got. I think that's everything. Did I cover everything for the last? Yeah, I covered everything. So yeah, there you go. My weekend reading report and all the stuff that showed up. Catch me tomorrow. I'm hoping to get a Robert E. Howard show up and on the air. And then I've got a video about Garb August coming later this week. And of course, Epic Comic Book Wednesday. All kinds of exciting stuff coming here to the Manor. I will catch you next time.